Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into the Guilty as Charged podcast, presented by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Excuse me, while I gather myself. My name is Steven. I am your host. Joining me today, as always, are my guys Alex and Tyler. Alex, I assume you've had a busy day watching some tennis, some soccer. How you doing today, man?
I'm not going to talk about any of the tennis, but the soccer was good. Sorry for all of our English listeners. That's a tough one to lose on.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Heartbreaker for the fellows across the pond. But it was a good game. I had a lot of fun watching that one. Tyler, how you doing today, man? And update everyone on your puppy, dude. It was some big weekend for you guys.
Absolutely. I'm doing well today for two reasons. One, I don't watch soccer because that's a horrendous sport to watch, and I can't believe that my two co-hosts are watching that crap. And I pray to God that my kids don't grow up liking and wanting to play soccer. Also, I'm doing well because I got a new puppy. She's 8 weeks old. Her name is Galadriel, which everybody knows. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. So Galadriel is her name. She's wonderful. She's super sweet. She's already potty trained, basically. She knows how to sit and come, and she's just a wonderful dog so far, and I love her very much. Yeah, don't laugh so hard, Alex.
Yeah, make sure you check out Tyler's Instagram and Twitter to see some puppy pics, because I know all of us can use puppy pics in our lives. As for the soccer, man, like I generally do not watch soccer. Like I can never sit down and watch like the MLS. It's so hard to watch. Yeah. But like I'll watch the big games. Like I watch the Copa America stuff and the Euro final, things like that. So I'm not like super into soccer, but I'll watch the big stuff. When the World Cup happens next year, I'll watch that. I think Alex is a little more into that than I am, but it is what it is.
Yeah, speaking of the Copa America, I didn't know why they were filming in like 144p.
Yeah,
the entire game
was so bad.
Like the worst camera I've ever seen. And comparing it to the ESPN camera today for the Euro, I was just like, what the hell is this?
I know. We got the 8K camera at the NBA Finals game, zooming in on the fans, and we got the Copa America filmed with like a Razr cell phone. It was so bad.
Those were great.
It was a good game, though. So got a good episode planned for you guys today. We're going to talk about the hiring of Alex Stern and the Chargers expanding their analytical department. We are going to talk about some of Anthon Lynn's comments concerning Justin Herbert and the direction of the franchise that he shared with Compas on the Beat, which I thought was an interesting interview. And then we are going to continue our positional breakdowns. And today we're going to talk about the Chargers linebackers. So we're going to start, like I said, with the hiring of Alex Stern. Tyler, we'll start with you here after kind of looking into him or potentially, just like what are your general thoughts on the hiring of Alex Stern and the expansion of the analytics department for the Chargers?
Business as usual for the Chargers under Staley so far. Here's what we're going to do. And then, we walk the walk, talk the talk, all the same. They want to get into analytics. So they hired Cody Shada. It's like, okay, that's cool. They got a guy in the building. Now it's like, let's bring in another guy who's, supposedly well regarded and did well in the analytics bowl or whatever it's called, which is that the new nerd thing? I have no idea. But I'm happy for him to have made it. And, we may have some news about certain things that I can't talk about because I was told not to, but there are things we can talk about eventually, mid-July. But I'm happy this is happening. The only concern I guess that I would have is, who's like the main guy in charge? Like, are there too many cooks in the kitchen at one point? Is Stern kind of more that guy? Is it Shada? Like, I don't know exactly what their roles are going to be. Hopefully they can all get along, but like, I don't know how this works. Like, do you have one guy who like sends in the final decision? Do they both talk and then give something to Staley? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how that's really going to work. It sort of sounded like how I read it is that Shada's the more on the field kind of guy. I mean, they both will kind of be involved in that, but it sounded like he's kind of going to be the one in Staley's ear, and that Stern is going to be also still like the general research, leader of the department, so to say. But I don't know if that's the case. That could be me talking out of my ass based on a paragraph I read. Who knows? But I think, anyway, more analytics is a good thing. And the fact that we're going in that direction after, a decade of caveman football, regardless of whoever the coach was, is a good direction nonetheless. So I'm pretty happy with the hire. Tyler said, there's a couple things we can't talk about with this hire, but let's just say some people might know some people, and I'll leave it at that. So maybe we'll have something planned for you. But in general, I'm enthused about the hire. and it's just kind of a good direction for the Chargers to go in.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a great direction. I'm curious to see how this one works out too. But my understanding of the analytics department under Anthon Lynn was that it was like one intern who like barely had a say in anything. Who like on game days would like occasionally like pipe in and be like, hey, this is what the analytics say. Like that's basically what I've gathered. Now they have that same intern, I think, and then they have Shada and now Alex Stern. So obviously the expansion, doubling the analytical department is great news. You mentioned the Data Bowl. Alex shared this quote with us, so I'll read it here, where that kind of explains what the Data Bowl is. And he said this is from ESPN Seth Walder. He said this is described by event officials site as a quote annual sports analytics contest that challenges members of the analytics community from college students to professionals to contribute to the NFL's evolution of the use of advanced analytics, end quote. And then he goes on to say, according to the page, contestants use a combination of traditional football data and next-gen stats to analyze current trends and varying player performances while attempting to push the limits of the way football is both played and coached. At the end of the day, the event hopes to engage and empower the football analytics community to drive innovation. So it's essentially like a conference, from my understanding of that quote, where all these guys, be it college, interns or actual professionals, they get together and essentially they have, a powwow of the analytical trends and kind of discuss what they think, this team could do in this situation and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, every year the kind of NBA and a lot of these other sports leagues revolve around the Sloan Analytics Conference. So I imagine that the Data Bowl is kind of something similar, although in the form of a competition a little bit, but it ultimately is all about sharing ideas. So I think that that's, a good thing to have Alex Stern. The fact that he's led something like that and been involved, that's definitely a good thing. And yeah, I think when you get more minds, I wouldn't be surprised to hear Alex Stern or Shada going to the Sloan Conference eventually, because that's, the other gathering of all the nerds in front offices. So that's what we should be trending to.
That's awesome. This might be a tough question to answer or not, depending whether you know it or not. Do the Saints, Packers, or Niners have an analytics department that you know of?
No, I actually do not have any idea.
Me neither.
I assume they would. Like, I assume the most of the NFL probably has one, depending on how big or small it is. But I would assume at least, these Shanahan-style teams, like they're very heavily predicated on analytics, at least from my understanding. So it looks like Alex is looking it up maybe right now.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that.
Well, I was just going to say, it seems like, I don't know, the Packers might not have one based on how they played in the championship game, but,
Fair enough.
Yes.
Good point.
And how they approach their roster construction, for sure.
I'm all for it. Even if the analytics is just going for it on fourth down more. Listen, we talked about Eric Weddle last episode. Without that game call on fourth down, that fake punt against the Chiefs, Chargers would not have made the playoffs in 2013. So I'm not saying you should always go for a safety sneak on a punt kick, but I'm not saying advocating for that, but that aggressiveness can pay off.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, just the one thing I found is that there is actually an Albert Breer article. It is a little bit outdated. That goes into how all 32 NFL teams handle analytics versus, kind of the old school, as he says. And then there actually was a survey from 2020 towards the beginning of the season where they talked about which teams were the most analytically advanced as per a GM survey. And they did have the Ravens, Browns, the Eagles, and the Colts as sort of the incorporating analytics most into decision making, but of course those aren't the only teams that use analytics.
Yeah, that makes sense. The Colts being up there is not surprising at all, especially with Frank Reich. So absolutely something to keep an eye on, and once we're able to get some details on who does what, we'll be able to share those with you guys. All right, so let's talk about Anthon Lynn's comments. We're not going to dive too much into a lot of the topics of conversations on that thing because he's no longer on the team. But there were some interesting things in terms of philosophy and just his general opinion about the Chargers that we wanted to touch on. So we talked a little bit about, or at least I have, about my mindset of, concerning rookie quarterbacks. And one of the things that he said is that he, quote, "I did not want to expose him," meaning Justin Herbert, too soon. "I've seen what that has done to some top picks, especially at the quarterback position, and how sometimes those young men never recover because they're living in a day and age where media is just right there. I mean, social media and things spread, and some of these kids are just not mentally strong enough to overcome a lot of the negative vibes that they get early in their careers. I think that's pretty obvious when you look at that quarterback position. But Justin had to go in and play. We didn't have any choice. Tyrod got his lungs punctured. Justin found out as the ball was literally in the air. I'm grabbing Justin saying, 'You're the starter. You're the starter.' And the way he handled that situation, I tell you what, he couldn't have handled it any better." So, Alex, we'll start with you on this one. What'd you make of his comments about wanting to kind of protect Justin Herbert from the outside noise?
Right, and I think it was partially the outside noise and also the fact that, Justin Herbert, I put this on Twitter again, but, he was drafted in the middle of a pandemic, and then,
Right.
had basically like a 3-week training camp, it felt like last year, and no preseason games, right? Like that was the situation he was going into. And then you have a quarterback this year like Trey Lance, who basically didn't play football almost all of 2020. And you have plenty of quarterbacks who, have these either not gaps in their game per se, but gaps in their preparation and things that they need to work on. So, I mean, my kind of philosophy on that is that I still think, we can revisit, the past, but to me, sitting Herbert was the right decision. Now, we'll never know how the season unfolds if Tyrod doesn't get his lung stabbed. So maybe that was the middle ground in between the sit him and not sit him options. But, to me, it just felt like Herbert, if you watched him in college, like, I know we like to do the thing where it's just like, oh, if you didn't like Herbert coming out of college, you're stupid now. But like there were a lot of problems with his game. Like, I mean, I remember sitting with Steven watching, Oregon film on Zoom before I was even on this show as a member. I remember doing that. And so, to me, it's not specific to Herbert or any other quarterback, but I think there is something to be gained that, hey, if you're not, say, like a Trevor Lawrence, and by that I mean someone who's started a bunch of games and looks like a finished product, then there can be an advantage taken to just, taking a step back and, waiting for the time. And I remember Fernando came on the show last year and basically said if Herbert had a preseason, he thinks that he would have started out of the gate. So maybe that would have happened. Maybe it wouldn't have. But to me, I didn't think there was really anything wrong with what Anthon Lynn said there.
It's possible if he had a preseason, Anthon Lynn would still have a job. I mean, I think if he went out and had, against the Carolina Panthers, his first, actual true start, if you will, and some sort of game tape on him, he had one of the worst EPAs of the team, according to Arjun and what he put out. So no, I'm not saying that Herbert would have struggled against the backups and the third stringers or whatever, or second stringers in the preseason, but if he looked okay, let's say he played like he did against the Panthers in the preseason, would you have started him week 1 over Tyrod Taylor? Especially if Tyrod Taylor had a decent preseason? Probably not. Anthony Lynn might have still had a job. As far as, putting him in, obviously they didn't have a preseason. So, should they have put him in sooner? No. I don't think you should have. There's no way you could have known what you knew until you knew it. And, as far as coaching for me goes, when we do gymnastics, we teach them the basic, routines or whatever, but we build the bonuses and the dangerous skills over the course of a year. We don't get them ready just for the first meet of the season for Judges Cup. We prepare them all the way, months and months down the line for the dangerous and difficult skills at state and regionals and nationals and whatnot. So I kind of understand that, you got to wait. You got to wait till this guy is ready. And frankly, when Herbert hit the field, he didn't look ready. It took him 3 games to finally be like, oh, there it is. But then again, based on how he was in college and based on everything we knew at the time, I think it was the right decision. And he didn't look completely prepared until he got to his 3rd game. So I still don't disagree with Lynn here. And everyone's like, oh, he's so stupid for not starting him sooner. But I just don't see how you could have. But then again, what would that preseason have looked like? What did we all miss by not attending training camp? What did we all miss by not having a preseason? Because we just went from everything he was in December and January to all of a sudden starting week 2. And we didn't really have much to go off of other than, like you said, Fernando saying, hey, he looks pretty good. But otherwise, like I feel like he was kind of undercovered and we didn't know much about him. Like truly, I feel like the 6th pick in the draft was a quarterback was undercovered, in my opinion, by the media. I knew more about Bobby Hawley than I did Justin Herbert, in my opinion. So, in hindsight, I would have just, I would have sat Herbert. And that's based on him and the pandemic. Some quarterbacks, sure, like Joe Burrow, I probably would have started week 1. Justin Herbert, I probably would have waited. The whole season, I'm not quite sure, but he would have had to show me he's ready in practice. And I don't know, was he ever? I'm not sure.
From the media standpoint, I always think it's interesting, like looking back at Hard Knocks and like the only real Herbert coverage we got was him throwing into the nets that one time. And I'm like, if you look at other quarterbacks that are on Hard Knocks as a rookie, like he should have been getting way more coverage on Hard Knocks than he did, and especially by the media. In general, it's my belief that unless you have like an established, really good veteran quarterback, that rookie quarterback should play from the start. Anthon Lynn has talked about several times that he wanted to kind of replicate the Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes thing. And it's like, well, people forget that Alex Smith was a really, really freaking good quarterback for Kansas City. Totally. Like he led the most efficient offense in the league for 3 or 4 years. They were in the playoffs, just, had some whiffs in the playoffs, but they were a contender with Alex Smith. And Tyrod Taylor is not in that same kind of category. The same kind of conversations are being had right now in Chicago with Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. And it's just like, Andy Dalton is not Alex Smith. Like Andy Dalton was a lousy quarterback last year. And so I think in general, the rookie quarterbacks, if you take them in the first round, should start from day one. Obviously, someone like Trey Lance, that's a little more dicey. Justin Herbert last year without the preseason and things like that, it's a little more dicey. But my issue with Lynn's comments here is that our understanding was that they were going to have a competition, that Tyrod was going to have to earn his spot as a starter, and Justin was going to be able to have a chance. And it doesn't feel like that actually happened. Like, it doesn't feel like Justin Herbert got a chance to prove it. Like, even in, a not having preseason world, it didn't feel like Herbert got a chance to actually be in a competition. And, that's kind of backed up recently by Keenan Allen saying that, he had barely caught passes from Justin Herbert until that first game. So that's kind of my issue here with what Lynn is saying, is that I understand, pandemic, and you want to be able to have him be prepared, but it just doesn't really feel like Lynn really gave Herbert a chance to earn it. Like, even in limited practice reps and even in a limited training camp, I don't know. I just feel like it was Tyrod's job as soon as the first preseason game was canceled.
Yeah, and I do think Lynn kind of has a point about the media, because I think the media now has gotten quicker in terms of like turning on people, particularly quarterbacks. I saw this in the fall with Carson Wentz, because to me, and Carson Wentz had a historically bad year. But if Carson Wentz was playing 15 years ago, I honestly don't think that he would be out of Philadelphia right now, because I think the media kind of covered things differently, and there wasn't as much pressure building up on social media. And I think that's also important, just remembering that all these guys are young. Also, from my city, I know Ben Simmons' brain is fried from 5 years of social media. So, I think that when you talk about somebody like Herbert or somebody like Burrow, somebody like Tua, like that, here's that outside noise. I do think that is kind of a big thing, and you're starting to see that with Tua now. Like, imagine telling someone 15 years ago that you would draft a quarterback in the first round, and then there would be like serious discussion about, should we trade him? Like, we were hearing that stuff about Tua, and like, to me, that just wouldn't have happened, because it felt like people had time to develop, and that's just kind of, it is a thing now. Like, we do give quarterbacks those periods, but it feels like it happens for a less and less amount of time. And so that's kind of my thing with how the media works and how social media works now, just kind of dogpiling on some of these guys, and a lot of them are really young.
Well, to your point about Tua, like, it wasn't just trade him. Like, a lot of people were saying that the Dolphins should have re-signed Fitzpatrick to start over Tua. And it's like, okay, now, like, what are we doing here? So I totally agree there. It's definitely, an instant gratification world. And to your point, also, everybody in the media hates Carson Wentz except for Dan Orlovsky, who thinks he's like going to win an MVP this year. So good times there. The other thing that Anthon Lynn here, unless Tyler, did you have anything else about this?
I just want to I can't remember the situation exactly, so I was just trying to look it up. But how do you think the media would have responded if they took Herbert and sat him for 2 years and he didn't start till his third year, like Phillip Rivers? And I'm curious what the media was like then, because listen, like, it's not like Rivers was taken, 64th in the draft.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious what the media would have been like, or what they were like with Rivers sitting. Granted, there's a very, very different option in front of Rivers, but obviously you take a guy, like, what a funky situation that was.
Well, and it was like, everybody talks about like, oh, the Chargers made a mistake, like letting Drew Brees grow, but it's like, that was a really tough situation to be in. And, his arm was also like supposed to be done. Like multiple NFL franchises said that he's never going to be able to throw a football again. So,
yeah,
hindsight is 2020 for sure. Obviously, if you're winning, then, that kind of solves everything and keeps issues on a hush hush. But the other thing that I thought was interesting that Anthony Lynn said with Compost on the B, he said, quote, "I've had time to reflect on my 4 years in LA and things that I would do differently if I had to do it all over again, and things that we did well. We did some things well. I felt like the organization was in better shape when we left than when we got it." So that's an interesting one, because, the Chargers in 2017 versus Chargers in 2021. Do you think Lynn is right here? Do you think the Chargers are in a better spot now in terms of roster construction, in terms of whatever, versus in 2017?
I think he's right. I mean, I think you talk about the whole franchise. Remember that nobody wanted to take that job. From going from San Diego to LA,
fair enough.
The roster not being quite what it is now. Like, yeah, the reason everybody wanted the Chargers job this year is to work with Justin Herbert. Being in LA helped, but like the fact that they have all these weapons on offense and defense, while we question the depth of the roster, like that's why every single coach kind of wanted this job, whether it was Brandon Staley, whether it was Brian Dable, whoever it was coming for it. And that just wasn't the case in 2017, partially because of the move, but that was also a bit like of an older Chargers team. You had Phillip Rivers there, you had Gates there. Is that Malcolm Floyd's last year in 2016, I assume, or I don't remember.
Yeah, Floyd didn't play in LA. Floyd was
Floyd just played in San Diego. But yeah, I mean, Weddle left the team, obviously. So I think that that was just kind of an older team, and that it kind of reached its point. Like they had some chances to make the playoffs and just didn't. So I think, putting with Herbert and all these weapons, like the Chargers are, to me, 4 years ago, they're in a much better position now. And, is that because of Lynn or is it because of Herbert? I think it's much more because of Herbert in terms of positioning for the future. But I do think, everything you do hear about Lynn is that the players never quit on him, right? So the fact that never happened, I think is a good thing for the future too, as far as this coaching staff is going forward, right? A lot of these guys who have been on the team 4 or 5 years, like their only coach has been Lynn. And from what we know, not a great coach, but he was a good leader. So I do think, to me, if you're comparing it to 4 years ago, they are in a better spot.
Oh, man. How do I look at this? Are they better than they were when he started? Okay, so if I'm looking at the 2016 roster, and I am looking at it, like, is the receiving core I'm not talking like 2021, all those additions don't count. Although I do feel bad that I feel like Lynn and Telesco had the plan to Tyrod for a year, then let's go Herbert, and then let's all make these moves in 2021. And I think Lynn never really got a chance to, see those moves carried out. Although I don't know how much he would have invested in the offensive line. But okay, is Dontrell Inman, Tyrell Williams, and Travis Benjamin and Keenan Allen a worse or better quadruple threat than what they had last season? And Tyrell Williams had 1,000 yards that year. It was that year, and then they drafted in 2016. Like, I'm not saying that Lynn rode the coattails of these guys, but in 2016 they drafted Bosa, they drafted Henry, they signed Casey Hayward. They made a lot of really good moves, and I believe they also, I know they didn't. They didn't have Russell Okung then. But I don't know. Are they better because of Lynn? I don't know. Like, to me, just that they reached a higher peak. There's no unquestionably. I think at their peak, their best team, was better than any Mike McCoy team, I think, hands down, for sure. But by the time that they left, were they in any better hands? Like, it just seems kind of like a wash to me. Like, you have your quarterback, you had your quarterback, now you have your quarterback. You drafted an edge rusher, you still got that edge rusher. And I don't know. To me, it doesn't really seem all that different. Like, what was Lynn's mark that you can say that he, other than the peak, of course, which is really good, but we're talking about beginning and end. And is the end point a whole lot different than the beginning? Not really. They didn't really establish anything different. There were still injuries. There was no sports science. There was no analytics. In general, I'm pretty sure the wins losses overall wasn't a whole lot different than what Mike McCoy had. They had a good first 2 years and dropped him or losing the last 2 years. Same thing McCoy did.
Right.
So, I don't know how much of a difference there was, to me, to be completely honest. And I think part of this early success they had was because of Rivers and then some of the good moves they made in 2016. Yeah,
in terms of the overall roster, like Tyler's saying, I do think it's pretty similar a lot, and there was a lot of carryover, right? And so I get that side of things. I will say the one thing that I'll always give credit to Anthony Lynn for is the culture and the leadership that he established, because I think we all remember Mike McCoy press conferences, and Anthony Lynn's this year were pretty bad, but for a different reason, right? But Mike McCoy was just like, why is this person a head coach? It was just mind blowing how unprepared and just there was no energy. There was no positivity coming from him. And so it was just really culture wise, it was hard to watch the Chargers under Mike McCoy. And, Alex mentioned Eric Weddle, that's kind of the shining example, but that's what the culture was. It was a lot of there was a lot of toxic vibes coming from the franchise. So the one thing I will say about Anthony Lynn then is that the culture that he established was very, very positive. There was some great leadership there. And if Mike McCoy were leading the team last year, man, I think it would have been 2-14. It would have been so hard to watch that team go into the season every single year or every single game. So I will give Anthony Lynn credit there. But like we said from the beginning, this team needed a severe analytics and X's and O upgrade from the Anthony Lynn era. So there's definitely positives and negatives to what Anthony Lynn was able to do as the Chargers head coach. But the Chargers are in a better direction, but almost because they fired him.
Well, yeah, and I'm not saying that, they're in a better spot 4 years ago because of Anthony Lynn. I'm not necessarily claiming that, but if you're just straight up asking me, almost in a kind of presidential, right, in a vacuum, a presidential approval poll, I mean, on a technical level, they are in a better place than they were 4 years ago.
Right.
So yeah, I think not so much on the field, but culture wise, I do think he did do a good job in terms of turning around where the franchise was and where it had to go. Because truly, I don't believe we can debate whether the Los Angeles move has been successful, because in some ways it has, and in some ways it hasn't been. But I think it would have been a lot rockier had it not been for Anthony Lynn, and instead we had Matt Patricia. I don't know. I think that could have been a lot worse. So to me, Lynn, he deserved to be moved on from, and I think they made the right decision moving on from him. But I do also think he deserves some credit for some positioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Tyler.
Would the 2017 Chargers beat the 2020 Chargers?
Yeah.
I can go down the list, and I actually think they would.
I think they would too.
I'd have to look more in depth at the roster. I honestly,
because they won 9 of their last.
It was kind of like the last season we had.
Yeah,
they started 0-4 and they finished 9-7.
That was Lynn's first year, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, without the Younghoe Koo mess, that team, I hate the shoulda, woulda, coulda mentality, but that team really was, a kick here, a kick there away from being, an 11-win team. So I think the 2017, it's different, obviously, because last year's team was so young after all the injuries and things like that. And it is what it is. But
I was just going to say, speaking of shoulda, woulda, coulda, can we mention Derek Carr real quick? Who said that they were 3 or 4 wins away from being a 12-win team.
I know.
After coming 1 play away from losing to the Jets. Come on, dude. Yeah. I just had to get that out there.
Well, because I tweeted about this, and I do I hate that mentality after the season of well, we were a bounce here and a bounce there away from being a playoff team. It's yeah, but you were also a bounce here and a bounce there from being a 3-win team. Yeah. So a lot of people have said that about the Chargers last year who defended Anthon Lynn, or well, if this happens, they could have won here and here. And it's yeah, but if this happens, if Marcus Mariota doesn't throw the ball right into Isaac Rochelle's hands, they lose that game. So, it is it goes both ways. And I think not enough people recognize that the negative possibility there is also true because, like Alex mentioned, the Raiders and the Jets game. And, the NFL, it's really about winning single score games. That's what separates the great teams from the bad teams. And the bad teams are always whoa, we were so close to being a playoff team. It's but you weren't.
Close doesn't count. Thank you to my gymnastics coach for driving the anxiety into my brain that I always had to win or it didn't matter. Pre-Ricky Bobby.
Pre-Ricky Bobby. Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to move on now to our linebacker conversation. I think there's obviously a lot of positivity coming about this group, and we've talked about them a little bit. Obviously it's going to be different than what Brandon Staley had last year when he didn't really have any good linebackers. So I just did a film breakdown on the Bears linebackers. That's Danny Trevathan and Roquan Smith, and kind of what we can expect in terms of X's and O's, their pass coverage responsibilities and things like that. So that's up on our YouTube channel. Make sure and check that out. Tyler, what's your biggest question mark or concern about this linebacker group? And what maybe defines their season?
Well, by golly, what position group have we not started with where we don't say, oh God, I hope they're staying healthy the entire year? Usually we can make the case for every single one. So aside from that, and aside from Tranquil, who I think you are about to do a breakdown on, so I'll kind of leave that to you. Yeah. My question is, and not that this will define their season or anything, but I want to see what Kaiser White does as the other pass rusher Staley could bring off the edge. And I was looking back some of your old tweets and breakdowns about Kaiser White, and he looked good coming off the edge. And last year among linebackers was at least 10 snaps, pass rush snaps. Amazingly, Denzel Perryman and Kaiser White were both in the top 8 in pass rush productivity. Now, which, of course, right? And again, a reason I missed Denzel Perryman, but White only on 17 pass rush snaps, he still had 4 pressures, 2 hits, and a sack. And so the team kind of needs that low snap but high efficiency sort of spark that Perryman was. And I'd love to see Kaiser White possibly take that role. I know it's different. Obviously, he's not going, I don't think Kaiser White's playing inside linebacker anytime soon, as long as the other two are on the field. And I guess that was the same for Perryman. But, some sort of rotation here, pass rush there. I'd love to see what he can do because, Derwin James, I'm not saying he took away from Kaiser White's performance, but, when both started as rookies, Kaiser White had a really good game against the Chiefs, and he had a really good game against the Bills, and he was on his way, and then he got hurt, and he's just never quite found it since. So yes, I guess I am circling back to health. Can he stay healthy? And let's see him as a pass rusher because, I think that would be certainly a great weapon for Staley to use.
Yeah, for me, obviously we talk about injuries and depth all the time for every breakdown, it feels like, just because that's what this team is. But for me, my biggest question is usage, and that's what I kind of asked Robert Mays about when we had that conversation with him of the linebackers, just because they didn't really use their linebackers much in the Rams. And, the question is that about talent? Is that about personnel? Or is that kind of about the scheme as well? So, for me, I kind of think the answer is a little bit in the middle there, but I do think that Brandon Staley does prioritize the first and third levels of the defense. He sure talked about it to depth in terms of, meeting with the first and third levels quite a bit, his secondary and his defensive line. So, I'll just be curious to see, is he going to use them in a way that is, putting them in position to make plays, or do they sort of play to the flow of the defense, right? Meaning they sort of go where everyone else is going, or, are they going to be put in specific spots? And I think Kenneth Murray obviously can be used as a pass rusher. We've seen that before in the Patriots game last year. They're going to use him. Denzel Perryman, that's somebody that I haven't thought about in a while, just because he's been off the team and he's in Carolina. But that's kind of someone I wish. Yeah, it's kind of someone I wish was still on this team a little bit, just in terms of We've talked about their weaknesses in the run game and like how bad they were whenever Denzel Perryman or Justin Jones didn't play. So, Denzel Perryman is somebody that I think you can make a real case for them kind of missing him. But again, he would have been a depth player and there were sort of some injury concerns. So, I kind of understand it. But I do think, depth is definitely a question mark just because, they really have probably 4 guys that I trust to play some snaps. And then everybody else is kind of like, well, they'll chip in when they do, but I'm not sure how this is going to go. So, for me, the biggest question is usage and how that's going to go. And go watch Steven's video. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet, but I will. I made the thumbnail for it, so I will get a chance to watch it. But for me, it's usage and the depth.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed out the usage because it is going to be super interesting, and we've talked about this because Brandon Staley, like he recognized the weakness on the roster and he pivoted to a strength of the roster on the Rams, and so Vic Fangio did not do that. Vic Fangio is very much a traditionalist. Like I need my 2 linebackers on the field at all times. It seemed like, and it was. It was really interesting because Danny Trevathan is awful, like lousy in pass coverage. And, the inside linebackers for this specific scheme, like they're not asked to cover receivers all that much. Like they had to, under Gus Bradley's scheme, like we're not going to see Drew Tranquill motion out and follow Tyreek Hill into the slot and cover him. Like I watched happen recently, which was so frustrating. But, they do have to cover, right? It's just mostly they cover the tight ends, the running backs, the flats, the short to intermediate range over the middle. But even a team that was as bad as the Cardinals in 2018, like they were able to expose Danny Trevathan and his, lack of ability to be efficient in coverage because, if you turn on that game from 2018, David Johnson had a field day going against against Danny Trevathan. So it's just going to be interesting to see like how that balances out because Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquill are absolutely better than anything that Staley had last year. But I think if you hear him talk, he recognizes that the best way to stop opposing offenses is to limit the explosive passing game or passing plays. And it's really hard to do that in the NFL today with having 2 inside linebackers on the field at all times. So, how much are these players playing on the field? Because Danny Trevathan and Roquan Smith, they logged 2,000 combined snaps for the Bears in 2018. So I don't think we're going to see that high of usage for those 2 players. But I don't necessarily think that it's going to be as low as what Staley had with the Rams last year either.
Right. I wanted to get in here and ask another question because the coaching staff seems to have been fascinated by Ogbongbemiga, and that was someone up until we did that roster breakdown episode. I didn't seriously consider making the team at all, until we heard those kind of comments from Ronaldo Hill and Brandon Staley and the rest of the defensive staff. So I sort of wonder, we kind of did the roster predictions episode already, but in terms of Neiman and Ogbongbemiga as kind of the new additions, how playable are they in year 1 is also a question for me.
God, I hope. Okay, no, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to be that PFF guy who says this. So you know what? I don't think that Ogbongbemiga will be quite as ready early on, and I don't know how much he'll be asked to do outside of special teams. But I'm very, very interested in Nick Neiman, who is a guy that I mean, Kaiser White's in a contract year. I'm not saying they're the exact same kind of guys. Right. I'm not really sure where White fits in this defense. Neiman is going to be your inside linebacker and special teams guy. I think Neiman's going to have a good year. I don't know. I just this gut feeling about him. I think it's because it was slightly a running joke. Also because I picked him in our mock draft and he ended up making the team. So maybe I just like him a little bit more. But I have a good feeling about him. So I think he can contribute early on. And he's gonna because he can cover. I don't think Ogbongbemiga. Dang, I'm the first one to mess it up. I don't think Ogbongbemiga can cover as well as Neiman. So I do think Neiman's gonna have a bigger impact early on.
Well, I mean, Neiman kind of has to too. I mean, he's the 4th linebacker really on the depth chart right now. Yeah. So I mean, he's kind of gonna have to play at any rate.
Yeah, I think he'll play every a little bit here and there, depending on who's healthy or not. But I think outside of everything that we've already talked about, I think one question that I have is really what's the ceiling for the Drew Tranquil and Kenneth Murray combination? Because and how does that play out between their ceiling and their floor? Because I think everybody's really excited about the pairing, and rightfully so. I think there's a lot of things athletically that Kenneth Murray is going to be able to do and bring a lot of electric plays to this team and potentially make that leap. But Drew Tranquil has had a lot of injuries over the last few years. He had the ankle last year. He tore his ACL in college. So I think two of the best things that Tranquil does are his ability as a cover linebacker and his ability in space. Like, he is an insane tackler in space, and he never misses. So I think they balance out each other well. But what's the ceiling for these two? Like, do either of these have the ability or the potential to be a Pro Bowl player this year, or is the best case scenario for these two players just that they end up being above average? And is that good enough? Like, that's kind of where my head's at with these two players.
That's a good question. Let me ask you then, what would you grade the tandem of Trevathan and Roquan Smith in that year? I don't know if that was a good year for them in general, or.
Well, Roquan, that was his rookie year. And so he definitely had some growing pains, but he's so similar to Kenneth Murray, man. Like, the ability to go sideline to sideline, make plays as a pass rusher, the two of them are very, very similar. Danny Trevathan, his ability is very similar to like Denzel Perryman. Like, he's going to come up and he'll smack your pulling guard. He'll smack the center. Like, he'll make his physical presence known. But like I said, total liability in pass coverage. So, but I mean, he was so good against the run. And I think that's like my biggest concern with these two players is their ability against the run, because that's where they're going to miss Denzel Perryman, to be honest with you, because like we saw against Mekhi Becton, Denzel Perryman is not afraid to come up and just smack an offensive lineman, even if he's not going to make the tackle. Like, he's going to make somebody, feel his presence. And I don't like Kenneth Murray is physical, but it's a different kind of physical. Like, I don't think either of these players are the kind of players to come up and, take on a blocker, smack that blocker, and, let someone else make the play. Like, I think both of these players, they're more like shifty shedding blocks, if that makes sense. They're not necessarily, the old school, like, I'm just going to take someone head on and I'm going to win this collision like Denzel Perryman was.
Yeah, and I mean, Denzel Perryman wasn't afraid to get in Tom Brady's face and, be at risk for drawing a 15-yard penalty because that's all it takes when you're around him. He wasn't afraid of the contact, and I think that's going to be something to watch. Last year when it came to Drew Tranquil, I was kind of in on the breakout player hype. I mean, you just saw him do everything pretty well, whether it was playing special teams initially, then, being a really good tackler, like Steven mentioned. It just kind of felt like, last year was going to be the year until it wasn't, unfortunately, with the ankle injury. And, obviously the Chargers had a ton of injuries last year. Derwin James is probably the one where we go, oh, what would his season have been if he played, and that kind of stuff. But second on that list might be Drew Tranquil for me. Just because it's like, okay, this was a guy who came off had a really solid foundation, and then was going to be able to, play in this defense. And it was still the Bradley system, and maybe there would have been a couple plays where he had to go follow Tyreek Hill deep again. But I do think that he was sort of primed for that. So I am excited to see both him and Kenneth Murray sort of in respectively their year twos. And kind of what they do.
It's tough. This is such an accident waiting to happen with the whole damn team. But it sucks because, okay, if you don't have your linebackers, let's say Staley just, if Tranquil goes down, White goes down, and you no longer have, so linebackers. So you rotate in some more DBs. But then they set themselves up to not have any DBs to rotate in. So it just seems like a train wreck waiting to happen. So I hope that sports science team is ready to go, because I think it's just an accident waiting to happen between, those two groups.
Yeah, it is. Like, we've been talking about injuries and death of like, oh, can they withstand a Linval Joseph injury? It's like, well, this is the whole roster at this point.
It is the whole roster, other than quarterback.
Yeah, but I'm just kind of looking at the PFF grades and stats for linebackers right now. And I don't know, like it's a very top heavy position, like in terms of the whole league. Like in terms of duos, like outside of Levante David and Devin White, there aren't like any great duos. Like I guess you could maybe make an argument for the Saints. You know, they have Demario Davis, and I forget his other name. I'm totally blanking right now.
Yeah,
but
blanking.
But, you know, you've got, you know, none of these duos are like that great. I mean, you look at like what Denver has right now, like they've got Josie Jewell and Alexander Johnson, two solid players. But I think, you know, the Chargers, this specific duo can be better than solid if they stay healthy. So I don't know. It's just curious to look at like, well, how good can this duo be? And like, how involved are they going to be? Like Alex was talking about.
A lot of questions. Right. Please get the preseason here.
Well, to that point, we're only a few weeks away. So, you know, I wrote an article for LAFB about the Saints passing attack and what to look for there. So I just can't wait to like see this all come together, because like I think like I'm no expert, obviously, but you know, I think I have a solid baseline understanding of what this team is going to look like in terms of scheme. But I just need to see it, man. Like that little clip of Brandon Staley talking about the, you know, the specific packages or whatever that they have planned for Kenneth Murray. Like it just gets me so excited because, you know, he was one of the players. There were so many, but Kenneth Murray was one of the players where he wasn't being used the right way, and he wasn't, you know, they were not planning to his specific skill set. So the fact that Brandon Staley is planning for that specific skill set, you know, just gets me really fired up to talk about Kenneth Murray, because I thought he had an up and down rookie season, but the tail end, the last half of the season was so good for Kenneth Murray, and I'm gonna do a breakdown for him as well. But just really excited to see this duo and the whole thing, you know, come together.
Can't wait to watch the breakdown.
Can't wait to watch it.
All right, guys. Any other thoughts here before we wrap up today's show?
Not many. I just wanted to say that because preseason is coming up, we are considering doing some preseason live pods at the probably that San Francisco week, because I know Tyler is going to that Rams game, and we're giving away a ticket for that. But that second Niners week and maybe the Seattle week, we will be doing a preseason live pod, so that will be up. I will stay up until 10 or 11 o'clock on the East Coast, probably at midnight when that preseason game ends. But yeah, just stay tuned for that.
I think one of the preseason games is like Saturday at like 2:30 Pacific time. And like the times are super weird because of the preseason. But we'll definitely keep you guys posted when that happens.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to do all of that and finally see everybody that, you know, a lot of people have said, hey, let's go have a beer or something. So can't wait.
Yeah. So other exciting news, kind of, you know, Tyler and I, we've had a relationship for like 4 years and we've never met. Next week, we're going to be able to meet, hopefully in person.
Yeah, Steve is my fiance.
A friendship, not a relationship. I'm sorry. Working relationship.
4-year anniversary, you two.
It's been nice.
So, you know, once Alex finishes med school up, we'll be able to hopefully meet the three of us, you know, once he's back in the States. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. As always, make sure and leave us a rating or review, comment. Let us know what you think about, you know, the ceiling of Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquil, or, you know, what Anthon Lynn said. We're always open to discussing those things. Alex does a great job responding to comments on YouTube. So make sure and let us know, and we'll see you next time.